Hi, today we're going to be talking about workplace noise risk management. My name is Michael Terry, I'm from Momentum Safety and Ergonomics. This is the 5-Minute Safety Series. So noise is one of those topics that most of us have a bit of an idea about when the noise is hazardous or not, but we don't really know for sure unless we have some sort of system of knowing when it's exceeded a certain threshold. There is a bit of a rule of thumb when it comes to managing or identifying noise hazards that people have used over the years, and it really is just a rule of thumb. But basically what we're saying here is if you have trouble hearing someone or conversing with someone from 1 meter away because of background noise, that's a good indication that the noise is starting to get close to or exceeding the threshold for when it becomes hazardous. So that's a rule of thumb. Now these days we can get a little bit better than that, so oftentimes just to give a bit of a feel for whether noise is becoming hazardous, you can use smartphone apps these days. We never rely on those as our definitive noise assessment because there's going to be a lot of variability and you can't really rely on the microphone in a smartphone as your primary identifier of noise, but it does give you a nice idea of when you should proceed to the next level of proper noise identification. Once you make that call that yes, this is getting too loud and we need to do an appropriate assessment, then you can go ahead and start doing proper assessments with proper equipment. So you need to make sure that if you're doing a proper noise assessment or identifying the hazardous noise, that you use calibrated equipment to identify the actual decibel rating. And really, if you're doing a comprehensive assessment, you probably should use an expert here. So an occupational or industrial hygienist is usually the profession that will come around and do comprehensive noise mapping and noise assessments for your workplace. So when we're trying to work out what is excessive noise, we need to know firstly what the decibel rating of that noise is. It gets a bit tricky to understand. The workplace standard for noise is that you're not allowed to be exposed to more than 85 decibels over an 8-hour period. So what does that mean for shorter periods of exposure, for example? Well, if you look on screen here, what we've done is we've looked at the different exposure times for different decibel ratings. And you'll see that it goes in a bit of an odd scale. It's a logarithmic scale. And what that means is that as the decibel rating goes up, the exposure time goes down quite dramatically. The general rule here is that for every increase in 3 decibels, we double the sound exposure. So that means that once you go to 88 decibels, your allowable time goes down to 4 hours. 91 decibels, 2 hours, and so on. And you can see by the time we get to sound that's at 100 decibels, it's down to 15 minutes worth of time. So when it comes to risk assessment for noise, we can use a standard risk assessment, but we find that often this is one situation where we don't really need to do a comprehensive risk assessment. The noise level has been measured, it's been determined as hazardous. We actually can most of the time just skip straight towards noise control because we know it's excessive and we know what the appropriate controls are going to be. When it comes to control, we're going to use our hierarchy of control to make sure that we reduce that noise at the source where appropriate. So we're going to consider the type of equipment that we're using and trying to either eliminate the use of that equipment or alternatively substitute it with a less noisy device. For example, if you're using an old loud piece of equipment and you replace it with a nice new piece of equipment which does the same job but has a much lower noise rating, that's a big advantage. The old one might have been working at, say, 88 decibels, the new one might be working at 80. That's a huge change there because all of a sudden we don't require noise control. There's some engineering options that we can use. If we don't replace the equipment, we might use certain soundproofing ideas or mufflers or those sorts of things to reduce the impact of the noise. Administrative controls are going to be mostly looking at exposure times for workers. So if we know that we've got something that's 85 decibels, we can have it up to 8 hours. We need to make sure that workers are not working for more than 8 hours in that environment. So task rotation, moving workers through loud areas is sometimes and administrative control that can be used. But really at the end of the day, you've made your equipment as quiet as it can be, you're putting the workers and making sure you're minimizing their exposure time, there may still be excessive noise. Some equipment is just loud. Once that happens, we need to make sure that we're using personal protective equipment. It's the bottom of the hierarchy of control, but it is really important. And here we're talking about earplugs or earmuffs or a combination of both. So when it comes to personal hearing protection, we need to consider the rating that that hearing protection has, and we need to make sure that that rating is high enough to reduce the sound level enough so that we're working in a safe level of noise here. So looking at the screen here, we can see that we have different options as far as the rating is concerned. So we have 5 classes. The higher the class, the higher the rating, and the greater the sound level reduction is going to be. And you can see a class 5 there has 26 or more decibels that it's going to be reducing it by. So that means that if you have a sound that is up around 100 to 105 decibels, you're going to need to use something like a class 4 hearing protection device. Other considerations that you need to take into account when selecting hearing protection are going to be things like hygiene. So ear plugs tend to get a little bit dirty, messy, and you're not going to want to put them in your ears lots of times. So earmuffs tend to work a little bit better in that situation. Another consideration is eyewear or glasses. If people are using that and they're using earmuffs, that can reduce the effectiveness. So we need to make sure that we're choosing the appropriate hearing protection for people who wear glasses as well. Okay guys, so that's a quick summary of noise management in the workplace. The main takeaways from today's session is that you really need to identify the sources of noise where it's becoming a little bit excessive. And you can do this for a bit of a rule of thumb to give you an idea of when you're approaching that limit, but once you get close to those limits, you need to do a comprehensive noise assessment to make sure that you know what that noise level actually is. The second thing we need to make sure is that we control that noise at the source where possible by using substitution or engineering controls. And when we choose hearing protection as our primary control, we need to make sure we consider the rating and other aspects such as hygiene and just general use and comfort of the hearing protection that we've chosen. Thanks for watching the 5-minute safety series. If you felt like you got some value out of these videos, please click on the screen to see some of the other videos in the 5-minute safety series, or otherwise feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel.